This video is gonna make people angry. It's probably gonna make you angry. You may very much disagree with everything I'm about to say about Fall Out Boy, but let me show you something real quick. This right here is my college degree, Bachelor of Arts. So it says Bachelor of Arts, but it's a film degree, and I just wanted to show you that because I'm proud of it, and it just goes to show that I am not a music person. I don't have a degree in music. So everything in this video is subjective. It's opinion, yada, yada, yada. Get mad at me in the comments if you want, but I'm giving this disclaimer so that if you do get mad at me, that's on you. That's not on me. Okay, let's dig in to Fall Out Boy. This all started with a tweet that I posted a couple days ago saying, I might mess around and listen to every Fall Out Boy album ever today. I tweeted that. The next day, I took it literally, and I legitimately listened to every single Fall Out Boy album in a day. And as I was listening to it, it left me with a lot of thoughts, a lot of questions, and, really gave me a lot to think about. And that's when I came up with the idea of essentially making this video essay on Fall Out Boy. This is not going to be about their history. This is not going to be about all the information you need to know about Fall Out Boy. This is legitimately just going to be me reviewing every album as a whole after I listen to them in one day. So if you want to learn the history about Fall Out Boy, I'm not the guy for that. I'm just a guy that listened to them on Spotify and wants to tell you why their music is good, why their music's bad. Take it with a grain of salt, but let's get started with Take This to Your Grave. I can't believe I forgot the name of the first one already. Take This to Your Grave is Fall Out Boy's first album. It was released in 2003 according to Spotify. Fact check me on that. I didn't fact check anything in this video. This album is straight up punk rock. Fall Out Boy today, I would say, is nowhere on the spectrum of punk rock or of rock. I think they've gone the 100% pop electronic route, but we'll get into that when we get into the album Mania, and I have a lot more thoughts on that than I do this early album. Take This to Your Grave, for me, is a 100% forgettable album, or so I thought. When I was listening to every single Fall Out Boy album yesterday, I started with From Under the Cork Tree, because that's what I thought their first album was. But after I listened to everything, I went back through their discography and realized I missed one, Take This to Your Grave. And that's what made me think it was a completely forgettable album until I actually turned it on. It's going to be a recurring theme with a lot of these albums, but I grew up listening to Fall Out Boy, and those songs are burned in my brain, whether I know the lyrics or not. When I turned on this album, I didn't know any of these songs until I heard the opening chord progression, and I knew every single word. Just because this is their first album doesn't mean it is the first thing I remember or know about Fall Out Boy. I didn't start listening to Fall Out Boy until Infinity on High, and I had to work my way back. In 2003, I was 7 years old. I don't know too many 7-year-olds back in 2003 that were listening to Fall Out Boy. That being said, this, to me, is a great album. It is punk rock. I love punk rock. I love metal. I love anything with heavy riffs, thick bass lines, and this album has that. That being said, to me, it was a forgettable album because I didn't remember it existed until I turned it on. But just because it's a forgettable album to me, it doesn't mean that every song on this album is forgettable. Songs like Dead on Arrival, Grand Theft Autumn Where's Your Boy, Saturday, Chicago Is So 2 Years Ago, Grenade Jumper, and Calm Before the Storm were so pivotal in my early years of music listening. I got into Fall Out Boy because my older brother loved Fall Out Boy. So naturally, the younger brother listens to whatever the older brother listens to. And when I get an iPod, I just download all the songs he's got on his iPod. And without going through every single song on this album, because there's so many that I really just don't care about, I listened to once yesterday and don't want to hear again. They're just kind of okay. The album as a whole is a great punk rock album, almost a ska feel without any of the horns involved. But unfortunately, it's their first album, and you can really tell that it's their first album from production quality, and you got to give people a pass on that because it's not necessarily the production quality that makes a great album. it's the music, it's the ability to perform and play those songs that makes the album. And I think they made this album great. Would I love to hear this album remastered? Not really. It's sentimental to me, but it's an okay album. So if we're looking at a tier list, I would put Take This to Your Grave as a B, actually. While it is kind of forgettable, when you listen to it, it makes me feel good. It makes me happy. It's punk rock. It rips. And so I'm just overall happy with this album. And next up, we have From Under the Cork Tree. And if you read the title of this video, you know how I feel about this album. I'm going to go out and say it. Fall Out Boy peaked in 2005. With the release of From Under the Cork Tree, this is not a forgettable album. There is not one song on this album that is forgettable. While every song on this album may not be perfect, and I might not personally like every song on this album, overall, the entire theme, flow, and feel of this album are unmatched in Fall Out Boy's discography. And maybe it's because I was obsessed with the movie Stick It when I was young, and a lot of the songs from Under the Cork Tree are in that soundtrack, so it kind of dipped its toes into the film world, which, that's what I got my degree in, so I guess I'm biased. When I go through these songs, just reading the name of them, I know exactly what the song sounds like. The first album, I had no idea. This album, without hearing any of these songs for probably 4 or 5 years, it takes me right back. Brothers and sisters, put this record down. Take my advice, cause we are bad news. Our lawyer made us change the name of this song so we wouldn't get sued. Of all the gin joints in all the world, Dance Dance, Sugar We're Going Down, Nobody Puts Baby in the Corner. These songs, you can go through every single one. They're great. And I may be coming from a metal perspective because metal is my personal choice in music. I was 10 years old when this album came out. Did I listen to it right away? Probably not. I was 10. I don't remember. The first album that I really remember listening to was Infinity on High. But going back to this album, I believe that this is the album that really introduced me into more hardcore music, even though this is not necessarily a hardcore album. There are songs with screaming in it. You can find many, many punk rock songs from Blink-182 to Yellow Card with screaming in it. It's nothing new for this time period, but as a young kid listening to this music, I loved rock and roll. I loved thick, heavy bass lines, and I didn't realize it at the time, but that heavier style of punk rock is what shaped my music preferences now. And this album, I believe, is what caused that to happen. Because Infinity on High, as we're going to see, is nowhere near as heavy. From Under the Cork Tree, to me, is the greatest album Fall Out Boy has ever made. Solely from the perspective of each song is great, each song is unique, but the album flows. I mean, let's just look at this album from a banger perspective. You've got Dance Dance. That one went huge. Sugar We're Going Down. That one went huge. You've got A Little Less 16 Candles, A Little More Touch Me. That one went huge. The Music or the Misery. That one went huge. So many songs on this album went huge. Champagne for My Real Friends, Real Pain for My Sham Friends. What a sick name for a song, and also it's my favorite song on the album. You'll even see this from their first album, but Fall Out Boy wasn't afraid to use really stupid names for their songs. Not scared if these songs weren't going to get on the radio because of the name. They just made bangers that sound like they made it and had fun with it, and it was really their own sound. And then they slapped whatever name they thought was cool, funny, whatever. I don't know the story behind it, but I read these names of these songs. I'm like, these are people that are creating music because they love to create music, and it just got picked up, went on the radio, went platinum, whatever it may be. They really did something cool with this album, something that is memorable. Also, the intro to EXO is probably one of the best Fall Out Boy intros ever. Remember, I'm just talking about all this as someone who grew up listening to their music and just listened to every single album yesterday. I don't know the history. I don't care about the history. This album slaps. This album is better than all of their other albums. This album, if we're looking at the tier list, is absolutely S tier. If there was a double S tier, it would be double S tier. Nothing would come close to it. Their first 2 albums were so good, but they took what they learned, in my eyes, from their first album, applied it to their second album, and actually perfected it. And that leads us to Infinity on High. It is now 2007, 1 year later, and they release another album that is also an absolute banger. But I don't like it as much as From Under the Cork Tree. Infinity on High from 2007 is the first album that I remember listening to with Fall Out Boy. Some of my favorite Fall Out Boy songs are on this album. The Take Over the Breaks Over, love that song. The Afterlife of the Party, amazing song. Fame is Less Than Infamy, amazing song. Now, while this album has so many great songs on it, it has a completely different feel from the previous two albums. And I say this because I listened to all of them in a row. The first two have a very similar punk rock garage band Warped Tour type of feel. This one feels a little more produced, a little more melancholic. I dig it, but if I was someone who was a Fall Out Boy fan and I heard this at the time of release, I would have been in a place of, okay, what's going on? Why do a couple of their songs sound like they used to, and some of these sound really slow and more poppy? And I think that's because at this point, they were insanely huge. When you get as huge as you get, you have to mold to the demands of the producers and the record labels and pump out songs now that are gonna go places on the radio. And I'm sure they had that kind of pressure with From Under the Cork Tree, but it doesn't sound like it. This album sounds like someone else was running the show. The other albums sound like those four dudes in that band were running the show. And as we continue on and progress through these albums, that's a huge theme. But I don't know, this album's super sentimental to me. It is nostalgic. Every time I turn on The Afterlife of the Party, I just feel good. Even though it doesn't feel like a Fall Out Boy song to me, it is Fall Out Boy. And I have to remember that, and it's a great song. This album's great. I'm going to put this album in B tier on the tier list. A great album, different feel, but different is not bad. Let me just say that. Different is not bad. Different is good in a lot of cases, but for me, as a Fall Out Boy fan, I didn't like this change from Under the Cork Tree. Folly Deux. Is that how you say it? I'm going to go with Folly Deux. I don't speak French. I assume that's French. Am I assuming? Is that wrong of me? Probably. But it's okay. This album to me felt like a farewell album. When this album first came out, I remember listening to it, and as a young kid, I felt like this was the end of Fall Out Boy. And this was before they announced that they were going to go on hiatus and break up and do that whole 4 or 5 year stint, whatever it was. When this album came out, I was like, this sounds great, but it's like they added on to the melancholic feel from Infinity on High and the slowness. There were, again, a couple of songs that felt like OG quintessential Fall Out Boy, but you know, it's their band. They don't have to always sound the same. They need to progress. Progression is good, but this album just felt so different. It felt so pop in a punk rock way. I can't even call it punk rock, especially you listen to the song with Brendan Urie on there. That to me is a straight up pop song. And while I will say $20 Nosebleed is an amazing song, and it was my favorite song off of this album growing up, to me, that song felt like that was the transition point for them of, we're going to make rock and roll music to we're done. Which is then very confusing to me because it's followed up by West Coast Smoker, which is the one song on that album that feels like they had full control of that song and it went back to From Under the Cork Tree style or Take This to Your Grave, where it was just rock. It was just punk. It was very melodic, very heavy, very, just very good. I really, really liked that song. And when I was listening to this album yesterday, the songs I used to love, $20 Nosebleed, Coffees for Closers, America's Sweethearts, I loved those songs growing up. And when I listened to them yesterday, I could barely get through them because as you listen to the albums, it just doesn't flow. And that's something as a listener is very just specific to me. So not everyone has to agree with that. Not everyone's going to agree with that. Every song can be its own thing. But I really value artists who create an album as one giant piece. A great example of this is a band like Silent Planet, where they have interlude songs built into their album that connect songs and pieces, and it's like a giant puzzle that comes together, has incredible flow. Between these 3 albums, or 4 albums, I guess, of Fall Out Boy, the first 2.5, great flow, and then it just kind of dies down. That being said, this album, it was my favorite one growing up. I really loved this one more than Infinity on High and From Under the Cork Tree. Now that I'm 24 years old, opinions change, my taste changes, and I really don't like this album that much anymore. But that doesn't mean it's a bad album, and I'm going to put this one in the C tier. And that's solely because knowing what we know now, that they took their hiatus, and knowing what I felt when I was young, that this was kind of like a farewell album, without them even saying that, I felt like this was the end of Fall Out Boy, and I'm glad they came back. January 1st, 2013, Fall Out Boy releases Save Rock and Roll, which was their attempt to save rock and roll. And did they save rock and roll? No. They may have saved pop, but is rock pop a thing? So when you release on New Year's Day an album titled Save Rock and Roll with probably the coolest cover art I've seen on an album in a long time, especially as a junior in high school. When I saw this pop up on my iTunes, I was like, oh my gosh, they saved rock and roll. I click on the Phoenix and it's got this big war dun 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 feel going into it, and I'm like hyped up. I'm like 17 years old. I'm like, oh man, Fall Out Boy's gonna save the world. And then it's just kind of a boring song. Don't get me wrong, I listened to this album an insane amount of times, and I loved it when it came out, and I think that's mostly because of the nostalgia I feel towards Fall Out Boy. But now, 24 years into life, I listened to this album again, nearly 8 years later. It doesn't have the same wow factor for me. I will say, this album has some of my favorite songs: Alone Together, Just One Yesterday, The Mighty Fall, Death Valley, Young Volcanoes, and Save Rock and Roll. Those songs are all incredible in and of themselves, but to have it on an album titled Save Rock and Roll, and then this album in no real way, shape, and or form be rock and roll, but more so pop radio style, to me, it doesn't live up to its own name. So if I just walk into a record store and I see a vinyl record sitting there called Save Rock and Roll with this kid smoking a cigarette on the front and wearing this dope outfit in this dirty street with some stuff on the ground, I would look at this and I'd be like, that's going to be a hard rock album. That's going to be even harder than Blink-182, or it's going to be not as hard as Metallica, maybe AC/DC, whatever it may be. I'm going to pick that up. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to listen to it. And if I listen to this and I hear Just One Yesterday on Save Rock and Roll, I'm not going to listen to the rest of the album. They went from having the most obscure and interesting names for their songs that were followed up with obscure and interesting songs to having safe names that resemble, the words in the song that will sound good on radio. And maybe that's what they wanted to do. Maybe that was their vision from the beginning, was we're going to make punk rock and then we're going to go radio. We're going to make it big. I would love to do that. But it's called Save Rock and Roll, and I don't think they saved rock and roll with it. So here's the tier list for this one. I just ripped that album a little bit. I'm going to put it in A tier. Did they save rock and roll? No. But is every single song on this album good? No. The Phoenix is awful. The rest of the album is incredible, and that's why they're A tier. If they chopped off the Phoenix and changed the name to Save Pop Rock, boom, S tier, along with Under the Corkscrew. From Under the Cork Tree. And it just goes to show that 2013, in my opinion, and this is another video in and of itself that I can make, 2013 is the greatest year for music ever. And after Save Rock and Roll, I went off to college in 2014. My music taste changed from, this punk rock and Panic at the Disco to, Sleeping with Sirens, Pierce the Veil, Memphis Mayfire, For Today, a little bit heavier stuff. But it was Fall Out Boy that was pivotal in pushing me towards my dreams of listening to metal music more. So now it's 2015, Fall Out Boy releases American Beauty, American Psycho. Dope cover art. Again, Fall Out Boy really does well with their cover art. dope name. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. When I was listening to this album yesterday, before I even listened to the songs, I was looking through the track list and I'm like, oh no. This was the album that made me stop listening to Fall Out Boy altogether. Irresistible is what opens this album, and it is, it's just one of the worst Fall Out Boy songs ever. And I think that until I move down the list. American Beauty, American Psycho, that to me is an okay song. It's more punk rock, it's more like garage band style, it's more simple and it's cool. It's different, and I really liked that I put that in there. So that song gets a thumbs up from me, but it's not really one I would listen to too often. But followed up with that is Centuries. I hate this song so much. This is the album, and you could kind of see it and start to feel it with Save Rock and Roll, where Fall Out Boy started to fall into this anthem category. It felt like every song to me was trying to be this anthem of a banger that you would hear on Sunday Night Football, or that you'd hear in all these TV commercials, and it would fit in every sort of media possible. And they did a freaking good job with that. With Irresistible, Centuries, Uma Thurman, Novocaine, 4th of July, Immortals, all these songs are like anthems in media today. And we'll even see this more in Mania. I just don't like that style of music. But Centuries, it's boring. The kids aren't alright, it's boring. Uma Thurman. I remember the first time I heard this song, so this doesn't count for this review. Because when I listened to it again yesterday, I still did not like it. But the first time I heard this, oh my gosh, dude, I felt like a piece of my childhood died with this album. And the rest of this album is, honestly, like the first album, a little more forgettable. Jetpack Blues, Novocaine, 4th of July, Favorite Record, Twin Skeletons, I did not remember hearing those songs at all until I listened to them again yesterday. And Immortals, I knew that one because I really hated it. But all in all, if I take my own opinion of this album out, looking at this album, it's a massive success. It is good for what it is, making anthem songs, these big heroic, we can be a more. Everyone's walking into battle, or the cover art saves this album from being F tier is the lowest one. So this is a D tier album. Absolutely do not like it. Don't ever want to listen to it again. But the cover art's really cool. I like it. Looks like it was shot on film, and being a camera guy, love that. And so now we lead in to Mania, the final Fall Out Boy album that they've released. Who knows? They're probably going to release more because they're still making music, and that's awesome for them. And, even though I've said everything I've said in this video, I want to see them perform live still. That would be so sick. Even if they're performing their new stuff, it's just one of those bands that I grew up, have a lot of nostalgia with, and want to see perform. It's like the same with Metallica for me. I want to see Metallica perform before they all stop playing music. So this album, I didn't know it actually existed until yesterday when I listened to it for the first time. To me, it is another one of those anthem albums. Every song was, just trying to be this perfect little proper package of, hey, you could use this song in your commercial. Hey, you could use this in your movie. Hey, you could use, and I don't like that. Ooh, this album is not for me. Not for me. I won't say it's not good because I'm sure, millions of people love it. How many monthly listeners do they still have? 16.8 million monthly listeners at this current moment. So people love this album. Me, I don't. It's too electronic. It takes away from the whole band aspect of Fall Out Boy, having 4 guys. You got your bassist, your drummer, your guitar player, and your, rhythm guitar singer, whatever it may be. And that is dope. They're making music together. I'm sure they're all making music together with this, but I listen to this and I think, well, what happened to Pete Wentz? Well, what happened to the drummer? Is this just Patrick Starr's band? Or not Patrick Starr, Patrick Stump. Oh my gosh. It feels kind of like what Panic at the Disco has done. Where Panic at the Disco, and this is another video, Panic at the Disco is just Brendan Urie with a band name slapped on it. It's like Tame Impala. Tame Impala is just that one dude with long hair with a name slapped on it. Fall Out Boy feels like it's Patrick Stump with Fall Out Boy slapped on it. I don't know. This album is F tier. I don't ever want to hear it again. The songs, for me, and my personal taste, remember, this is all opinion-based. Oh, not good. Fall Out Boy peaked in 2005. That's been my opinion on Fall Out Boy, and I'm sticking to it. One of the things I really didn't hit much in this video that I had written out and I wanted to talk about was the bass in all these albums, because, you know, it's right back there. I grew up playing bass. And some of the first songs I learned were Fall Out Boy songs. They were some of the first I learned because they are some of the easiest to play. And I think that just comes with the punk rock territory, or, you know, rock in general is, you know, bass is typically, you know, just 4 to 6 notes in different patterns throughout the whole song. Fall Out Boy fell in that category. Fall Out Boy, I feel like in their later albums, especially in Save Rock and Roll, took steps to diversify their bass guitar. Pete Wentz made great strides in Where Did the Party Go? Absolutely love that song. Love playing it on bass. But I didn't touch on it in this video because as I was listening to the album yesterday, you know, I used to focus on the bass and wish there was more. But as I was listening yesterday, it wasn't apparent to me. So, you know, I feel like I have always crapped on the bass tracks in Fall Out Boy's music and wish they were a little more intricate. But now listening to it, it was exactly what the songs needed at the time. But in those last 2 albums, was there even a bass guitar at all? I don't think so. And to round off this video and to show you how easy the bass guitar is, especially in From Under the Cork Tree, I'm going to play Sugar We're Going Down completely by memory. I haven't looked at a tab sheet in probably 7 or 8 years. And I haven't practiced this song in probably 4 or 5 years. So here's my attempt. Thank you for watching. I hope this video didn't make you too upset. If you agreed with me, let me know down below. If you disagreed with me, let me know down below. You know, let's just have some healthy conversation, if that's possible. And yeah, this is just my view, my video essay on all of Fall Out Boy's albums after listening to them all in a row in one day. I hope you enjoyed.